Welcome to my video on the best Terastal for every fighting type Pokemon, where we will go through the pure fighting type and all of the fighting type combination types, and we will go through and assign them all the best Terastal typings for each of the individual dual typings and the pure typing itself. Now, if you're looking for a specific dual type or individual type, go down into the comment section below. There will be not the comment section, the description, sorry. There will be a timestamp for each of the individual typings. Now, I do want to give a quick plea. If you could please like and subscribe and whatnot to this video, I would really appreciate it. I've put a lot of time and effort into this, and I would really like the support. Obviously, you don't have to, but you know, I'd really appreciate it. It made my day, quite frankly. But yeah. Without further ado, let's get started. Just some clarification about this video. First of all, this is not an exhaustive list of every single Terastal that would work well with that typing. It's just ones that, in my opinion, would work best for those specific typings. Also, this does not factor in abilities. So in the trailer, we saw that Colossal turned to a water-type Terastal and had its steam engine activated. Now, in some cases, there are going to be abilities that are going to allow for this to be able to take place effectively, and it's going to allow for abilities to be used with regards to the Terastal combination. And when I've talked about their typings here, I have not considered abilities. I will talk about that separately when I do the competitive guide videos in the future. Also, some Pokemon may be suitable to use specific Terastal based on powerful moves that they have. So, for example, if a Pokemon has a ground type move such as Earthquake, which is more powerful than Terra Blast, then they could definitely turn to that Terastal to get that stab to be able to allow that to do more damage. So, in some cases where Pokemon have got powerful moves or a wide move pool, they may be suitable to use more variety of Terastal. But again, I have not factored that in with this one, just on the specific typings as a generalization. Here we have the pure fighting type. Now, there are many notable Pokemon when it comes to the fighting type. You've got Mienshao, Conkeldurr, Hitmontop, so many Pokemon that have lots of fighting capability in the fighting type. Now, fighting types do have three different weaknesses. They have the fairy type, they have the psychic type, and they have the flying type. Now, the best Terastal for this probably would be the steel type, because one is super effective against fairy typing and also resists flying and psychic type Pokemon. So steel works really fantastically in terms of working with fighting types, sorry. Next up, I've put ghost typing here. One is super effective against psychic types and also gives you an immunity to fighting and normal as well, which could work in your favor in some instances. And then finally, you have got electric. Electric covers the weaknesses associated with flying. So if you have issues with the flying type, then definitely run an electric Terastal. As I said, I think steel is probably the best one in this case. However, you can use ghost, electric, or ice or rock to cover that weakness as well. Next up, we have the normal fighting type Pokemon, which is Beware. Currently, that is the only one that applies to this typing, but I have got 4 suggested Terastal for this one. You have got the side where it comes to the fighting, so you can see a flying type come in, so you go for the electric type move, because obviously that would be super effective. You could also see a psychic type come in, and then have the dark Terastal. You could replace that with ghost if you wanted to, but I thought dark works quite nicely here. You do have the flying Terastal as well, in case you're coming in with a fighting type Pokemon. That flying Terastal would obviously be able to take away your weakness to the fighting type, resist the fighting type, and also be super effective against the fighting type. And the same reasoning for the fairy type being there as well, purely for the fighting type that is likely to come in. Now, you could also run things like poison and steel on this one if you wanted to, obviously with a fairy type move, fairy type potentially coming in. But obviously, as I said, this isn't an exhaustive list, but sometimes there are very situational cases where you could have a lot of different Terastals that would work. Next up, we have the bug and fighting type. Now, there are 2 massive Pokemon that sport this typing in Heracross and Buzzwole. They are both fantastic Pokemon to use. If you haven't used them, I definitely recommend it. Now, Terastal, there are 3 different typings I could recommend here. One, you've got ground. Ground covers your fire type weakness. The fire types obviously are going to be super effective against you. Now remember, you're not going to have rock type super effective against you because you have part fighting now as well. Steel types, they are there to cover the fighting type weakness with fairy types coming in, so the steel type will be super effective against the Fairy type, and also would resist any Psychic type attacks that could potentially come in terms of the weakness of the fighting. And then Electric covers any Flying type Pokemon that could decide to come in against you for super effective damage, and also resists any Flying type damage. Remember, you are 4 times weak to Flying types, so having Steel or Electric or even Ground would reduce any of those impacts in terms of damage taken by. Next up, we have the Dark and Fighting types. The two notable Pokemon that we've got here are Scrafty and Pangoro. They are both fantastic Pokemon that you can use, but the biggest issue with this typing is the 4 times weakness to Fairy typing, and also the weakness to Flying types. Fighting types, sorry, and Flying types. So for this, you have Terastal, you have the Fairy type, which is the big one, so Poison or Steel is going to be your main Terastal typing here. Just bear in mind that obviously Fighting types can come in, so Steel isn't as good. I would recommend Poison over Steel in this case. You've got Flying to cover the Fighting type Terastals, Fighting type Pokemon that could come in, and you've also then got the opportunity to use Electric types when it could come to the Flying types as well, because we have got a Flying type weakness, but that would also cover Rock and Ice there. But I think definitely your Poison is going to be your top Terastal here, followed by Flying or Steel. Next up, we have Dragon and Fighting. The only Pokemon that's got the relevance here is Kommo-o, and Kommo-o is a fantastic Pokemon, absolutely love it. But in terms of this type, I've got 3 suggested Terastal. The big issue with Fighting and Dragon is you have a weakness to Fairy, a 4 times weakness to Fairy. So Poison and Steel are definitely going to be your big Terastals, because you need to get rid of that 4 times weakness, and they are super effective against Fairy. The other typing that you kind of have to worry about a bit more is going to be the Flying type or the Psychic type. Now the Flying type can be covered easily with an Electric Terastal. The Psychic type you can cover with like a Dark Terastal, for example, or you could just go for the Steel Terastal and have that so it's not very effective against you. Obviously at that point it does become a little bit cautious in running the Poison type, so do be a little, because consider if you're going to run the Poison type, I definitely recommend go for having a Dark type Pokemon in your team as well to absorb Psychic type hits, if that is going to be the case. Next up, we have got the Electric Fighting type. Now currently there are no Electric Fighting type Pokemon, but in the long term hopefully there will be some that do appear. Now in terms of your fighting weaknesses, you haven't got the Flying type weakness, but you have got the Fairy and the Psychic type weakness, which is why I would definitely suggest having the Steel type on here to allow you to hit the Fairy type super effective damage and also resist the Psychic type. But do bear in mind that a Ground type could definitely come in for the Electric typing here, so that is a possibility of being a danger. Now in terms of covering the Ground typing, you have got Grass, Water or Ice, so you can use any 3 of those. Bear in mind that Fighting type moves are very common. You're unlikely to have a Flying type come in, so Grass realistically should be pretty safe, and again Electric type probably unlikely to come in, so Water would be pretty safe as well. So Steel is the only one that's slightly unsafe there, but it does have pretty decent coverage in terms of your weaknesses. Here we have the Fighting and Fairy type. Now with Fighting and Fairy, they have actually got several weaknesses. One being Poison from the Fairy typing, and then the Fighting type you do have the Psychic, Fairy and the Flying type weakness. So in terms of this, with the Fairy typing, you're likely to bring in the Poison type in this case, so the Psychic type Terastal will be really good against the Poison typing. You could also run Ground if you wanted to, but that Psychic also works as an option. You've got Steel typing, which would cover any Fairy types that wants to come in against the Fighter type, and it also resists the Psychic types and also is immune to the Poison types as well, so Steel works really fantastically, and Ice will cover any Flying type Pokemon that decide to come in against this thing, as well as having coverage on several other different Pokemon that could possibly just show up as a neutral damage. Next up, we have got the Fire Fighting type, and this is known as a starter type because it is Blaziken, Emboar and Infernape typing, all of which are starter Pokemon. So for this, I have got a few different suggested Terastal. You have got a weakness to Ground and Water. Those 2 weaknesses allow for you to run a Grass Terastal quite effectively, because they are super effective against both the Ground and the Water typing. Now, you do need to be cautious because there is Flying type weakness that you already have, and if a Flying type Pokemon comes in, then that Terastal is not going to work very well. You could also run the Ice type. The Ice type allows you to cover your weakness to the Ground type Pokemon. It also allows you to cover your weakness to flying type Pokemon as well. So it has got that double coverage there as well. And then same with electric, allows you to cover your weakness to water types as well as flying types. So any of these three would be really, really good. As I say, just be cautious about using the grass type one because it does open you up to that flying type weakness continuing afterwards as well. This one is the fighting and flying type Pokemon. So we've got Hawlucha and Galarian Zapdos, and unfortunately this thing has got like 6 weaknesses. So with regards to the fighting type, you've still got your weakness to psychic types, you've got your weakness to fairy types, you've got your weakness to flying types as well. And then flying types, they are weak to electric, grass, electric, ice, and rock. Now, with regards to these, I've come up with 3 different Terastals. You've got ground type Terastal here, which allows you to be able to work against some of the types there, such as your rock type. You have got your steel type here, which allows you to be able to hit the rock type, the ice type, the fairy type as well for super effective damage. So I would say that's probably going to be your best one in this scenario. The ground also covers the electric typing as well. You've then got your poison typing, which would allow you to resist a few different hits and allows you to hit the fairy type for super effective damage there as well. I think in this case steel is definitely going to be your best bet, but ground could also be a really good option for you. Next up we have got the fighting and ghost type. Now this is only currently available with Marshadow, but in the future I'm sure we'll see other Pokemon that do have this typing. Now in terms of weaknesses here, you have got fairy, flying and psychic as a weakness. However, you're unlikely to see a psychic type come in due to the fact you already have this ghost typing. So I'd say fairy and flying are definitely going to be your main enemies in this respect. I think steel type is definitely going to be the perfect typing in this case because it allows you to resist all 3 of your weaknesses and hit super effectively against fairy types. You've got electric typing, which allows you to cover the flying type weakness, and also I've put dark type here just in case someone with a psychic type comes in and tries to hit you hard, because that will happen sometimes. You could also run something like a rock or an ice type, but you do need to kind of be careful in case alternative mons do come in and cause damage there, but that is another alternative that you could run. Here we have the fighting and grass types. So we have got notable Pokemon of Breloom, Chesnaught and Virizion here. I'm pretty sure there are a couple more of fighting grass types out there, but those are the main 3 that I noticed. Now with this you have got a huge weakness to flying. So 4 times weakness to flying, meaning that realistically your Terastal probably wants to cover that. So ice and electric, they definitely cover your flying type weakness there as well. Now I have put Ghost on here because you have got a psychic type weakness, and also you could run this to prevent taking damage from poison types, for example, or as much damage from poison types. So Ghost would definitely work, and it would give you 2 immunities in the process, as well as giving you a super effective attack against a psychic type. So ice and electric probably going to be your best ones here. Even rock would be really effective here to work well. You have obviously got fire type, so rock would actually be a really, really solid Terastal to use now that I think about it in retrospect. But any of the ones that I've spoken about would definitely be really good to use in this scenario. Next up you have got the fighting and ground type Pokemon, which currently at time of recording there are no Pokemon with this typing. However, you do have several weaknesses on this mon. So you have, in terms of your fighting, you have got fairy, flying and psychic. Now ghost type Terastal gets rid of your psychic and also gives you an immunity to fighting type Pokemon and to normal type Pokemon as well. The rock allows you to cover ice type weaknesses that you'll have from your ground type, as well as covering your flying type weakness. Now steel also does allow you to cover the ice and the fairy type weaknesses as well, which you could use, and also gives you a resistance to a couple of the other typings. Then I've put grass here as well to cover the mons that will come in against the ground type. So you resist the grass type that would come in against you. You are super effective against water types. However, ice types do become a little bit of a concern. You could run a flying type if you wanted to, but I would say generally stick with kind of your ghost, rock or steel typing, and then grass in more of a situational situation. Next up we have the fighting and ice type, and the only Pokemon that currently has this typing is Crabominable line. And what we have here is we have weaknesses in fairy, psychic, flying, fire, rock, and, well actually no, we don't have a rock weakness, sorry, so fire would just be the last one there, and also fighting. So What I don't think will happen is I don't think flying types will come in against this one because they're obviously weak to ice types. Meaning that you want to focus on the fairy typing and also the psychic typing. So you could have a ghost or a dark type Terastal if you wanted to, but with the dark there is a chance of that fairy type coming in. So I'd say focus more on ghost than dark. With regards to the fairy Terastal, you might want to go for poison or steel. However, steel will work effectively in covering some of the other Pokemon that want to come in and also give you resistance to things like the psychic types and also flying types if they do decide to come in. Now, with regards to the water type, that allows you to cover any type of Pokemon that particularly would want to come in on this, such as a fire type, to allow you to obviously get rid of them, same as the ground type would, but the water type can kind of give you a different typing, meaning you're going to have a completely different set of resistances and weaknesses on there. So I think in overall, the ground type is going to be the best, then followed by the steel type, and then water type is possibly going to be your third typing there. Next up, we have the fighting and poison type. So there are several different weaknesses that you do have associated with this typing. So there's the ground type in particular, there's flying type, and there is also the psychic type, which you are 4 times weak to. Now, with regards to the psychic type, I definitely would consider having either a ghost or a dark Terastal. I think that's the biggest one because obviously that's your biggest weakness and it takes away a lot of the problems. In terms of dark, it completely takes away the impact of the psychic typing. Now, you might want to have a look at the flying type and go for an electric type or an ice type or a rock type Terastal in order to cover that. Obviously, going for electric, it then only opens you up to 1 weakness, but bear in mind you are weak to ground already, so you may want to consider going for the ice type as an alternative. And then I've gone for the grass type here because realistically you're going to have the ground type come in, and if the ground type comes in, you can use the grass type attacks and also have your grass type resistance against the ground type there. Next up is the fighting psychic types, and these are Gallade and Medicham currently, but there could well be more on the way. So with this, your typing, you have got a weakness to flying types, you've got a weakness to ghost types, and you've also got a weakness to fairy types. Now fairy types, obviously I would say are the most common out of those 3, so definitely having a steel or a poison type Terastal would allow you to cover the fairy types really, really well. Also with the steel, it would allow you to resist the flying types also. You could go for an electric Terastal type if you wanted to allow you to cover for the flying types, but I think they are going to be less likely than the fairy type there. And I've also said you can cover the normal type here as well to allow you to get an immunity to the ghost type Pokemon, which are obviously going to be super effective against you as well. So any 3 of those Terastals I think are definitely going to be your top option. Here we have got the fighting rock type. Now the only Pokemon to have this typing currently is Terrakion, but I'm sure in the future other Pokemon will gain this typing. So with regards to this, you have got several weaknesses. You have got the psychic weakness, you have got the fairy weakness, you have not got the flying weakness that you normally have with fighting, but you have got the water weakness and ground and grass weakness from the rock type as well, and you haven't got the steel weakness due to having the fire type. So with this, you're likely going to see a ground type Pokemon or a water type Pokemon fairly commonly, so I would definitely recommend using a grass type Pokemon. As you're unlikely to see a flying type Pokemon, I think that this works particularly well. You've then got poison type, which allows you to be able to cover the fairy type Pokemon. Bear in mind, obviously, ground types are going to be quite likely, so not running a steel type would be beneficial for you in this case. But the poison allows you to resist the fighting type Pokemon as well. And then finally, we have water, which allows you to cover the ground type situation that could appear on here. So I think grass type definitely is going to be your top Terastal option, poison being a really good one as well, but you could definitely run water or any other kind of option that you think would work best here. Next up, we have got the fighting and steel type, and the 2 main Pokemon we have here are Lucario and Cobalion. So with regards to weaknesses here, you have not got the fairy or psychic weakness or the flying weakness involved with the fighting type, so you've basically nullified all of those weaknesses, but with the steel type you have got the ground and fighting type weakness. So with regards to Terastal, for the fighting weakness, you definitely could run a flying type Terastal, you could run psychic, or you could even run fairy if you wanted to, depending on what you personally think. I've just put fairy there as not fairy there, flying there as an option. And then with the ground typing, you could run water or grass Terastal to get rid of that. But bear in mind, they could also bring in a fire type against this, so using a water Terastal works really well against the ground and the fire type, and then ground works really well against the fire type that could possibly come in. So I would say in this case, water is probably the best Terastal typing, but ground, Flying, Fairy or Psychic are good secondary Terastals that you could use. Next up we have got Fighting and Water. Now notable Pokemon here are Urshifu, Rapid Strike, Keldeo and even Poliwrath. Now with regards to your weaknesses, you have got your weakness to your Psychic, your Fairy and your Flying again, along with the weaknesses associated with Water in Grass and Electric. Now when it comes to covering your Grass and your Fairy weaknesses, you have got the Poison Terastal. So I think Poison definitely works really well in this scenario. It covers 2 of your weaknesses and allows you to be able to hit them for super effective damage. Now Ground type allows you to cover a few different typings as well, including the Electric typing, which obviously is very common and is going to be super effective against you. And then the Flying typing does allow you to run over the Grass typing as well. Now you can run some other things to nullify the Psychic and the Fairy part there, or the Psychic and the Flying part. So you could run an Electric Terastal, you could run a Psychic, a Ghost or Dark Terastal. Like any of those would work, but I think the top ones here are going to be Ground, Poison and Flying to cover your weaknesses. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate every single view that any of these videos get, and you know I put so much time into this that if you made it this way, then all I can do is thank you with my heart, because you know you're what helps the channel. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. As I said, if you could interact, I'd really appreciate it. Comment down below if there are any ones that you disagree with or any ones that you would add a different Terastal typing to, and give your reasoning for it as well. And I'd really love to see that. I think that would be a really cool way to interact with me, and I will definitely take a look at them and I'll try and reply as much as I can. But yeah, thank you so much for watching.